Hello, everyone. I've gotten off the train to somewhere controversial, and I have no idea where it's going to take me because we've reached a place in society where if you ask the wrong questions or hold the wrong opinions, it really doesn't matter whether you're right, wrong, partially right or wrong, or whatever, you're still condemned. But I still feel like this conversation is important, so here's a fair warning. If you're the kind of person who believes that anyone who disagrees with the modern LGBTQ plus movement is automatically a bigot, then this video probably isn't for you. Think of this as a trigger warning, not because I'm trying to provoke anyone, but because these conversations have become so fragile that simply asking questions or holding a different perspective can get you labeled as hateful. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, I want to talk about why I feel politically homeless, and honestly, the simplest way to put it is it's not the 1960s anymore. You can't keep winning arguments by pointing backwards in time. The world has changed, but the rhetoric hasn't. In 2016, I wasn't political at all. I didn't care about Trump or Hillary. I barely paid attention, but suddenly everyone around me was panicking, crying, screaming, saying the world was ending because Trump was president. And that panic dragged me into politics for the first time in my life. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't avoid it anymore. An example is the left's arguments about LGBTQ plus issues. All he had to do was take the worst possible example of what someone on the right said and hold it up as proof that the entire right was hateful. That made the case for you before a real debate could even start. At this point, I want to show you two examples. These aren't the only ones out there, but they make the point clear. I'll put them on screen so you can see their pattern for yourself. In these two examples, Matt Walsh said transgenderism is one of the greatest evils in human history, and Tucker Carlson called transgenderism a cult and satanic. Other examples I won't show include Chaya Rayajik, who amplified videos that targeted LGBTQ plus educators and events. Candace Owens, who said there is no middle ground on transgenderism. Riley Gaines, who said men make the best women. Sebastian Gorka, who called gender affirming care mutilated boys and girls. Vivek Ramaswamy, who called being transgender a mental health disorder. And Charlie Kirk, who got a lot of heat and was misquoted a lot and ultimately died because of it, essentially said he was against transgenderism and the gay lifestyle. And here's the thing. There were conservative commentators who went after what they called the ideology of transgenderism. They weren't always talking about individual transgender people themselves or about their private lifestyles, but about the broader belief system and policies. But the way those comments were handled made it impossible to have a conversation about the ideas. The words themselves were demonized, pulled out of context, and used as proof of bigotry. That meant the whole debate got shut down before it could even begin. I think Democrats used comments like this to their advantage because they made it unnecessary to debate. All they had to do was slap a label on someone if they said something that offended or triggered someone. For instance, whenever someone on the right raised concerns like about trans women competing in women's sports or about biological men being in a locker room with young girls, the concern itself was often not debated on its merits. Instead, the person who said it was instantly labeled homophobic, transphobic, bigoted, and once that label was stuck on them, you didn't have to deal with their argument anymore. It was over. Here's a real world example of how this happens.
I think there are a lot of families out there who don't believe boys should play girls' sports.
They're not boys. I'm not going to listen to transphobia at this table. I am not going to listen to you call a trans girl a boy.
Are you going to allow me to finish my explanation?
When you use a word that's a slur, I'm going to interrupt. That's not how it is. They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not playing girls softball. I'm not going to sit there and listen to that.
Let's reset for a second because, look, this is a really heated issue. Right?
Here's how the exchange was presented online. A man says boys shouldn't play in girls' sports, and immediately the panelists label it transphobic without engaging the substance. I couldn't find the full CNN segment, so if there was more debate later, it wasn't part of what spread, and that's the point. What people actually see and remember is the label, not a reasoned conversation. The moment the word transphobia was dropped, the issue of fairness in women's sports was sidelined. Whether or not more content exists, the viral moment told the public that the label itself was the whole rebuttal. Debate over before it even starts. I'll show you another example here.
Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing that.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist.
I'm denying that trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
pregnant. So you are denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you?
Absolutely.
Or are they also treated like this? Where
No,
they're told that they're
question.
opening up people to violence?
We have a good time in my class. You should join.
I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this exchange.
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
So this is a perfect example of how far things have gone. All Senator Hawley did was question the language and ideas behind gender ideology, and immediately he was accused of inciting violence against the trans community. That's all it took. You weren't allowed to question anything without being slapped with a label. The debate wasn't about ideas anymore, it was about shutting people down. The strategy of these demonization labels was effective because there were always examples of conservatives who did say cruel or demeaning things about the LGBTQ plus community, and those examples became weapons to use against everyone on the right. Even people raising questions and concerns in good faith got lumped in. One of the things that really got to me was the inconsistency. Democrats always branded themselves as the party of diversity and openness to different ways of thinking from around the world, but then I noticed they seemed far more compassionate towards Muslims, even those who openly reject the LGBTQ plus community, than they were towards American conservatives in their own country. Strangely, they showed more willingness to engage with conservatives abroad than with conservatives here at home, who in comparison are much more liberal than the ones abroad, generally. People don't like to admit that, but it's true. Anyway, the double standards hit me so hard I just couldn't take it anymore. Right now, I wouldn't be surprised if a liberal was more loving and tolerant to terrorists because I see that sometimes online, specifically with a YouTuber of the name Hassan Piker. I won't get into it too much or show his picture. You can look him up for yourself if you're curious. So, the saddest part for me was watching how the messaging around LGBTQ plus issues changed over time. I still remember the original talking points, and they were beautiful. They were about reminding us that there were members of our community who felt isolated and wronged, and that they shouldn't be treated any differently than anyone else. The point was that they had the right to marry who they wanted, live how they wanted, and be treated with basic respect, just like everyone else. They had the right to present themselves however they needed without being harshly judged for it, and I can actually show you this change over time. Look at these photos. In the 1960s, before Stonewall, the annual reminder protests carried signs that said things like, homosexuals should be judged as individuals, and equal treatment as human beings. The message was dignity and equality. Nothing more complicated than that. Then came Stonewall in 1969. It was more controversial from that point forward. The modern LGBTQ plus movement began, but even then, the heart of the message hadn't changed. It was still about the right to live within freedom, respect, and equality. By the 1980s and 1990s, during the AIDS crisis and pride marches, the message was survival and acceptance. Groups like ACT UP carried banners like Silence Equals Death, reminding people that ignoring their humanity was literally costing lives. So if you look at the history, you see the continuity. The movement started with simple appeals to fairness, evolved through confrontation, and later through survival, but all of it was about equal dignity. But somewhere along the line, that shifted into something else. It became more like a cult. Suddenly, people were forced to believe that a trans woman was exactly the same as a biological woman. Suddenly, you couldn't even define what a woman was. Gender ideology began to dominate everything, and disagreement wasn't just disagreement, it was treated like hate. We all saw it. Take this, for example. I know I already touched upon the subject before, and I did a few more examples, but it's important to show the pattern.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mhm.
No,
Yeah,
I can't.
you can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the meaning
biologist.
of the word woman is so unclear and controversial that you can't give me a definition?
Senator, in my work as a judge, what I do is I address disputes. If there's a dispute about a definition, people make arguments, and I look at the
All right.
law and I decide. So I'm not.
The fact that you can't give me a straight answer about something as fundamental as what a woman is underscores the dangers of the kind of progressive education that we are hearing about.
During the 2022 Supreme Court hearings, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson was asked to define the word woman. And she answered, I can't. I'm not a biologist. That one exchange went viral for a reason. It showed how even asking a basic definition was treated as out of bounds, and people were quick to frame the very question as harmful. Another example is at Harvard University, where students were required to sit through Title IX trainings that told them failing to use someone's preferred pronouns could actually be considered harassment. The training even listed using the wrong pronouns as a form of identity abuse. That's not encouraging respect, that's mandating ideology. Take Leah Thomas. In sports, when Leah Thomas started competing in the NCAA women's swimming, every concern about fairness was brushed aside as transphobia. The underlying biological arguments backed by real sports science were rarely showed into the conversation. In fact, Leah Thomas was eventually stripped of some of her titles, but not without a very long, brutal legal and public fight driven by Republican critics who argued that the fairness issue needed resolving. And you saw the same thing with Olympic boxing Amain Khalif. During the time that Khalif was allowed to compete, the International Boxing Association claimed it had medical records showing Khalif and another boxer failed eligibility criteria. The IBA even said it sent those records and a letter to the International Olympic Committee warning them about the issue, but the IOC dismissed the tests as not legitimate and let Khalif compete anyway. Instead of having a transparent discussion about fairness in women's sports, the reports were brushed off as misinformation, and anyone questioning the situation got labeled transphobic. Whether you believe the leaks or not, the result was the same. The label replaced the debate, and then when World Boxing introduced mandatory gender testing this year, Khalif did not appear at the next major competitions that they planned to attend. The timing spoke louder than any label. And then there is this law in Colorado. The Kelly Loving Act expanded anti discrimination protections around gender identity and expression, and one of the most controversial parts was how it treated misgendering and dead naming under the bill. Repeatedly refusing to use someone's chosen pronouns or name could be treated as a form of harassment. Supporters called it a matter of dignity and safety, but critics saw it as the state outlawing ordinary speech, forcing people to say things they didn't believe, and punishing them if they didn't comply. Churches, parents, and even some teachers raised alarms that this violated both free speech and religious freedom. Yet, instead of having that constitutional debate, opponents were quickly branded as discriminatory and the discussion was shut down. That's the pattern I'm talking about. The moment the word transphobia gets dropped, the debate is over. Real concerns about definitions, fairness, speech, and rights are shut down before they can even be discussed. That wasn't how it started. The original advocacy, I remember, wasn't about upending systems already in place, and it didn't demand that everyone think the same way. It was simply about being respected in society and fighting for rights, not about demanding to be treated differently than everyone else based on who you think you are and forcing others into strange ideologies or demanding conservatives abandon their beliefs. That shift is what broke my trust. It became an ideology that made people believe they had the right to upend entire systems and take away the rights of other people simply because of what they believed rather than what was real. They didn't have to advocate for sustainable change or for solutions that actually worked. All they had to do was force people to change how they thought, and that's insane. The LGBTQ plus community could have, for example, advocated for single stall gender neutral bathrooms and individual showers and changing rooms over time. What ended up being pushed instead was an invasion of privacy in women's restrooms and locker rooms. And regarding sports, they could have advocated for truly inclusive leagues, like creating mixed teams of men and women that could have changed the way we think about sports altogether in the future. Instead, they pushed for trans women to enter women's sports directly, while promoting the idea that biological males lose all athletic advantages after transition. But that claim does not hold up. Sports science has shown that even after hormone therapy, trans women often retain measurable physiological advantages. A study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine tracked performance in the Air Force fitness test, and found that even after 2 years of hormone suppression, trans women still ran about 9% faster than women on average. Other reviews published in Sports Medicine and the Journal of Applied Psychology explain why. Years of male puberty leave behind lasting advantages in bone structure, lung capacity, muscle mass, and strength that estrogen can only partially reduce. One analysis even found that after a full year of testosterone suppression, trans women were still significantly stronger than cis women, nearly 48% stronger in grip strength, with about 35% more quadricep muscle mass. That's not opinion, that's data, and it isn't just scientists pointing this out. Major sports bodies have acted on it too. I probably can't name all of them, and the screenshot probably doesn't name all of them either, but the point is that sporting bodies like World Athletics, World Aquatics, UCI Cycling, and USA Swimming have all adopted policies that restrict trans women from competing in women's categories. Even USA Cycling and the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee have recently followed suit, tightening rules because of these clear physiological differences. The evidence is overwhelming and it directly contradicts the narrative that there are no differences. The data doesn't lie. People keep claiming that trans women in women's sports isn't a big deal because they make up such a small fraction of athletes. The NCAA president Charlie Baker testified in 2024 that more than 500,000 NCAA athletes, fewer than 10, were transgender, which works out to less than 0.002%. Broader reports summarize it as less than 0.08% on the overall athletic population. On paper, that looks like almost nothing. But here's the problem. The UN's special rapporteur on violence against women in sports reported that over 600 female athletes across 29 sports had lost nearly 900 medals to trans women. Think about it. A group that's statistically invisible has managed to rack up close to 1,000 podium finishes. That doesn't just contradict the claim that there's no advantage, it proves the advantage is real. The numbers shouldn't even be possible if the playing field were actually level, and whenever I hear people dismiss it by saying, well, it's such a small number of athletes, it doesn't matter, I can't help but hear what they're really saying. They're saying only a small number of people are cheating, so it's okay. And because those athletes are marginalized, we should allow it. That makes no sense. Cheating doesn't stop being cheating because it's rare or because the cheaters happen to be disadvantaged elsewhere in life. Fairness isn't negotiable, and dismissing nearly 900 stolen medals as a small issue is insulting to every woman who lost her place on the podium. And that's just the UN's number. Grassroots watchdogs like HeCheated.org have made their own database and compiled even higher figures, claiming thousands of medals with names, dates, and competitions listed. Yes, the site is biased, but bias doesn't erase facts. If those facts can be verified against official records, then the reality is even worse than the UN was willing to admit. Whether you go by the UN's conservative figure or the larger grassroots lists, the conclusion is the same. Trans women are not competing on an equal playing field with women. And the evidence is undeniable. And honestly, I shouldn't even have to point out that public opinion already reflects this reality. Poll after poll after poll shows that most Americans, roughly a 70-30 split, don't support trans women competing in women's sports. In fact, a recent Gallup poll found that about 7 in 10 Americans believe athletes should compete based on their biological sex. Deep down, everyone knows it isn't fair. The few who still haven't accepted the truth are often motivated by compassion. They don't want to see the trans community suffer, but many have also been misled by scientists and activists insisting the playing field was fair when it never really was. Another thing that's haunted me through this is how sexualization and double standards crept into the movement, especially when children were involved. What began as advocacy for dignity and acceptance has in some cases shifted into a push where adults became comfortable with nudity or overt sexual imagery in public events, even with children present. For example, critics pointed to pride events where explicit displays happened in front of kids, like the controversy in Dallas where a Pride festival included performances that many parents saw as inappropriate, and pride parades across the country have included incidents of nudity or kink displays in front of families, scenes that would never be tolerated at other community events, yet were excused here in the name of exclusion. After exploring YouTube, I was relieved to see that multiple people are expressing concerns about this issue, and it's not just coming from people outside of the LGBTQ plus community, it's also people within the community itself calling this out. Like this video I found by Finding Sky.
Pride Month is almost over. Thank God, because if I see another rainbow flag on my feed, I might buy a pack of Skittles and start slingshotting them at my screen.
No, 50-50, man.
My distaste may come as a surprise to some people, considering I'm actually a part of the LGBT community. In case you haven't noticed from my endless references to titties and busty Latinas in the past 10 videos, I like hot chicks. This is not a coming out video. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I don't need a rainbow flag and a teary-eyed video confessing the fact that I like big butts and I cannot lie, but it may be interesting to hear that I'm actually extremely ashamed to be a part of this community. And look, I know we've come a long way. There was a period of time when anyone who wasn't heterosexual was scrutinized or in severe cases even killed. And as glad as I am that I can walk down the street holding a girl's hand and not face the scrutiny, I also feel like we've passed the point of acceptance and are now at the point of blatant indoctrination. Someone has to say it. These pride parades have gotten disgusting. It's not even about acceptance anymore. It's a provocative and aggressive public display of hypersexuality and fetish. What was supposed to be an accepting and innocent space has turned into a hostile freak show. I didn't go to Pride, never will, unless it's to document the absurdity of it, but this is what LGBT is associated with now. It's no longer associated with peace, love, unity, and tolerance. Instead, it's associated with hypersexualization, provocation, fetish, and bigotry. I don't know what happened to the days when we would encourage people to accept themselves and make peace with those who disagree with us, because now we just scream obscenities at anyone even whispering a subtle argument. This community has managed to weaponize its own labels and use them unfairly, not hesitating to label any opposition as transphobic or homophobic. It's funny because we used to be the ones complaining about intolerance.
Okay, so stuff like this is really sad because Democrats once had a strong moral advantage when it came to protecting children and standing against exploitation, especially since Republicans have historically been the ones blocking legislation to ban child marriage, and which is basically, let's face it, forced marriage. For example, in several red states like Missouri and West Virginia, lawmakers have repeatedly rejected or stalled bills that would raise the minimum marriage age to 18. That made Democrats look like the party taking child protection seriously, but they lost that credibility when they started defending or ignoring things that clearly crossed the line. But now, after the sexual displays at pride events in front of children and the inappropriate behavior tied to drag shows, story hours, and other school-related events, the script has completely flipped. They no longer have the advantage because all of this is so blatantly in people's faces. It's not invisible anymore. It's highly noticeable, and even Republicans... if Republicans are doing questionable things like this too, it's not getting nearly as much attention. So, Finding Sky wasn't the only YouTuber within the LGBTQ plus community who speaks out against all of this insanity. Here are a few. I found multiple YouTubers that speak out on this issue, and this isn't even a comprehensive list. These are simply just the ones I listen to on a regular basis and remember. I'm unable to fit all of them at once, so here's some more of them. So, all of these LGBTQ plus creators have been outspoken in their criticism of certain parts of the modern LGBTQ plus movement. Many of them argue that the movement has become overly ideological, especially around gender identity and trans issues. They often raise concerns about how conversations on gender activism and sexuality have shifted from inclusion and equality to political conformity, censorship, and the sexualization of children's spaces. While their perspectives vary, they share a sense that the movement has drifted away from its original message of acceptance and now punishes those who think differently, even within the community itself. I, in case you haven't noticed, echo the thoughts of each and every single one of these creators on this specific issue to some level. The point is I still align with them a lot on this issue, which is why I wanted to include them in this video.
Happy Pride Month, ladies and gentlemen. No one got the memo. Pride is one of the 7 deadly sins. Today we're looking at some of the biggest freaks on the internet, some of the biggest whack jobs of all time. And today we are going to dive deep headfirst into the anus.
Oh dear.
That is how the LGBT community killed itself. Again, not trying to be overly incredibly controversial here or anything.
Okay.
I'm just spitting facts. So, Think Before You Sleep made a video why the LGBT movement is failing. I know the reason. It's because the LGBT movement maybe started as ways for different individuals with different lifestyles to want to get away with doing their shit in private. But, no, not anymore. Not anymore. Now it's about fucking up children. And that shit sucks. So, lock in, boys and girls. All of us facts are problematic. Yeah, facts are problematic. And no one likes to hear where this shit goes. So today we are going to be laughing at the downfall of a certain movement that may or may not have gone just way too far. You know?
Okay, Nux is laughing about this, but I'm not. Anyway, moving on. So, I know I'm ranting, but I want to also draw attention to this guy because I think this is important. I really hope I succeed in paraphrasing everyone accurately since I don't want to play all of these videos. Nuxanor isn't part of the LGBTQ plus community. He's more of a moderate conservative who says really controversial things, usually directed at either specific people or very specific types of people within certain groups of people, but phrased in a way that frustrates entire groups. And to be honest, he does it partially for attention. From what I can tell, he's actually tolerant of private LGBTQ plus lifestyles. What he pushes back against are things like blurring gendered spaces like bathrooms and sports, allowing medical interventions for minors, and what a lot of people view as the indoctrination of young children with gender ideology. He's also strongly against what he calls forced ideology. For example, compelling people to use certain pronouns or pushing social conformity around identity issues. If I remember correctly, I think I heard him say in one of his videos that trying to overturn gay marriage is ridiculous and a step backward. As you can gather from my video, a lot of what he believes specifically about the modern LGBTQ plus community resonates with me, even though I disagree with him on a lot of other issues that I wouldn't talk about right now. Nux made it clear that while he thinks most people in the LGBTQ plus community are rational, there are some whose behavior reveals violence or mental instability, and in his view, those individuals shouldn't have access to guns. Unfortunately, he has a point there.
Harder, but you need to try less being like somebody you're not and start to humble yourself and be somebody that God made you to be. He didn't make a man to be a woman. He made the man to be a man. He didn't make the woman to be a man. He made the woman to be a woman. And this is the truth. What are you going to do? Come attack me now? I should. Hey, man, that's up to you. If you want to pull that on me, well, God bless you. So you just threatened me with a gun. You just pulled a gun on my face. Man, Lord have mercy on you. This means that you don't even know who you are. Nope, I still love you. Even though you pulled a gun on me, I still love you. I still bless you.
Last weekend at the London Trans Pride March, Sarah Jane Baker, a violent male ex-con who identifies as a trans woman, took to the stage and said this.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy.
You should have stuck to that.
And be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a punch him in the face.
Not a good idea. This next one might be the worst one I've ever seen. I can't even find the original video. It might have been taken down, but it went viral at the time, so there's plenty of commentary.
I dare you to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make.
Dare accepted.
Tara J., a man who claims to be a trans woman on TikTok, got in a lot of trouble, so let's talk about him today. This is definitely one of the worst videos I've ever seen regarding a trans activist. Let's just watch.
If you back a wild animal into a corner, they're going to become a dangerous animal. I dare...
Okay, so a person should never, compare trans people to animals. That's not a good idea. For reasons I won't get into, but it's just not a good idea. It's not a good look. You don't want to do it.
You to try and stop me from going into a women's bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make. I dare you to try and stop a transgender woman in my presence from using the bathroom. It will be the last mistake you ever make.
Okay, another problem is that a lot of people would risk their lives stopping people like this from going into a women's bathroom. That's why this is a problem. One of the reasons why this is a problem.
Wow, what a disgusting human being. Yeah, I'm speechless. I think most of you are too, watching right now. That's not legal to say. It cannot be legal, right? He really said, respect me as a woman, or you'll not be alive anymore. That's a perfect way to get acceptance in society. This is why I say it has nothing to do with gaining more acceptance in society. It's about dominance, and also an excuse to harm others.
This is a call to action and a call to arms to everybody within the United States that are scared, worried, have children that are transgender, lesbian, bi, or gay. You need to arm up. Go out, buy a...
Okay, 1% of the population, or a member of 1% of the population, is telling 1% of the population to arm themselves up in order to possibly kill members of 99% of the population. Do you understand that this is not a good idea? Like, do I need to explain why that's not a good idea?
Learn how to use it. The time to act is now. You need to protect yourself, and you need to protect your fellow transgender brothers and sisters and theys and thems. You need to protect the rest of us in the LGBT community. There are lots of people like me who are not afraid to die.
You're
well,
outnumbered.
Clearly, look at what happened in Tennessee recently with a trans unaliver who unalived 6 people in the name of trans ideology.
Okay, so these clips are all I'm going to show, but the truth is that there are numerous clips and worse ones out there online. And yeah, that bathroom threat was one of the worst things I've ever seen come out of the LGBTQ plus community. Because of everything you saw, but also because of the implications behind it. A member of the LGBTQ plus community compared himself to a cornered animal. It's just not a good idea for a member of the LGBTQ plus community to compare themselves to wild, cornered animals, basically because of what people outside of the LGBTQ plus community are accusing the LGBTQ community of being of, and then all of a sudden you do a video like that. I'm just not going to get into it. I don't blame Nux. Honestly, I don't want certain people in the LGBTQ plus community or a lot of other people from other groups that I'm not going to talk about in this video to have guns either, especially if this is the kind of behavior they're showing. I would personally be fine with most people in the LGBTQ plus community having guns, but that's besides the point. That's not the point. What really worries me is that the broader LGBTQ plus community has allowed this kind of thing to happen, allowed people like that to invade their movement and make all of them look bad. This is deeply concerning, and it's part of why the Democratic Party is so weak right now. This kind of insanity discredits them. Anyway, back to Nux. What's crazy is the backlash he gets. He receives death threats constantly. He says that in a lot of his videos, and ever since what happened to Charlie Kirk, I get a high heart rate whenever he mentions it. Anyway, the irony is the fact that he often gets, well, he goes after people like me. That's the irony. For instance, he can't stand what he basically calls fat, liberal, mentally ill white women who may or may not stay single all their lives, which describes me pretty accurately, if I'm going to be honest. But here's the part that really says something about where we are as a society. If I would actually feel safer in a room with someone like Nux, a guy who openly insults people like me, he probably wouldn't care whether I live or die and would likely strongly dislike me or look down at me in real life than I do with people who supposedly share my political beliefs. Then something is deeply wrong. That's not just a personal feeling, it's a warning sign of how far we've fallen. And though he says a lot of things I disagree with, I also find myself agreeing with him on plenty as well. The reality is that people like Nux are the ones I lie awake worrying about every night now. I still haven't gotten over Charlie Kirk, and I doubt I ever will, but the people who often pissed me off in the past are now the ones I fear for, the ones I find myself thinking about and watching out for in the news. They aren't from the party I left, they're members of the party I thought I would never identify with, and now I catch myself hunting the news, hoping I don't see one of their faces on there, dead. The same faces that once drove me crazy are the ones I worry about most today. That's how upside down everything has become. I really hope this is an eye-opener for at least some people, because that's where we are right now. I've heard millions of people are leaving the left, and I guess I'm just one of them. Now, I don't want to make it sound like every single person that is really progressive is unreasonable. Take these two trans women, for example. So now, Samantha is about as liberal as you can get without being completely insane. She'll still label anyone who doesn't line up perfectly with the LGBTQ plus agenda, but the difference here is that she's at least civil about it. She's willing to have conversations, explain her point of view, and actually hear out concerns. She made it clear that she is, for example, unwilling to compromise women's safety when it comes to shared locker rooms and bathrooms, but at the same time, she wasn't convinced those safety concerns were real. She thinks they were brought on by homophobia. And it's weird considering the number of alarming cases I've seen personally. Now, this list I just showed you came straight from ChatGPT when I asked it to generate examples concerning bathroom and locker room incidents involving the LGBTQ plus community. It's not exhaustive. In fact, I've seen other YouTubers put together compilations that are far more shocking and detailed than this one. I think I saw one person do possibly more than 50 that was compiled as lists. But if I went down that rabbit hole and tried to cover every single case, this video would easily stretch into 10 hours. The point is simply that these examples exist, and the fact that even one or two of them happen should raise serious concerns, because one case is a representation of many, whether or not people know about them. So it's insanity that people's views don't shift even a little after cases like this. And in all of these cases, even if you're not dealing with a real person from the LGBTQ plus community, the point is that people are able to pose as a member of the LGBTQ plus community and get away with doing shit. That's the point. And cases like this are accumulating. Anyway, on to sports. I remember Samantha acknowledged fairness concerns when trans women compete in women's divisions, but she said she isn't convinced trans women have an athletic advantage, and she goes on to explain her reasoning. She came up with interesting arguments in regards to Leah Thomas, and I remember thinking that her arguments were impressive, whether or not they were true. It might be worth listening to. I can't really remember them off the top of my head, and I don't want this video to be 10 hours long. But she also spoke out against forced pronoun usage. This isn't the scariest liberal stance because of it, but her standards for labeling someone as homophobic or transphobic are still incredibly low. Back in 2015, for example, I remember the bar was much higher. You had to actually show intolerance by kicking your own family member out of your home for being gay, or refusing someone work, trying to get them fired, or even committing hate crimes against a person. I won't speak in detail about this next one that I wanted to mention, mostly because I haven't seen a ton of her videos and it's been a long time. But if I remember correctly, she's also very liberal, but she might even be a bit more reasonable, Samantha. I just wanted to include her screenshot. Her name is Alexis Blake. Now, I'm going to change the subject again. Refusing to use someone's preferred pronouns, being Christian and disagreeing with the lifestyle, saying trans women are biological men, or believing minors can't consent to surgeries, or disagreeing with the ideology in part. That's enough. That's all enough to get you branded a homophobe. And worse, I'm seeing people go as far as to say the only good turf is a dead turf, like the video I already showed you, or that refusing preferred pronouns should be considered a hate crime. It's insanity.
Should misgendering someone be a crime? The UK's Labour Party seems to think so. Under a Labour government, deliberately calling someone by the incorrect gender pronouns could become a hate crime, punishable by imprisonment, according to the Mail on Sunday. And with Labour streets ahead of the UK's embattled Tory government in the polls, this could soon come to fruition. Labour, the Mail on Sunday reports, wants to make hatred on the basis of, quote, gender identity, unquote, what's called an aggravated offence. This would bring transphobic abuse into line with assault and harassment motivated by hatred on the grounds of race or religion, which are punishable by up to 2 years in prison. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who is in favour of hate who thinks we desperately need more of it. But there are still plenty of reasons why criminalising hate in this way is a terrible idea that is bound to have all kinds of dreadful consequences.
Now, I know this only happened in the UK, but this line of thinking echoed in the US. That's the point. Here's another video.
I am not, sir.
Today I'm going to show you how to use pumpkin spice pronouns and sentences, so let's go.
Misgendering is when you refer to someone with the wrong pronouns. And in the age of 2023, you have actual grown men that are referring to themselves as she, her, and that they are a female. And it's getting to the point where now they're trying to make it illegal for you to misgender someone. So whereas before, I don't care how you refer to yourself as, I don't care what you're doing, you're not harming anybody, now you are. Now you're trying to make it illegal for me to just say, oh, hi, sir, how are you? When you look like a sir. So in this video, we're gonna see what happens when you do misgender a trans person, their experience, their opinions, all the different pronouns, and just see what they have to say. And of course, we're going to commentate on it all. Without further ado, let's just get right into it.
I am not, sir.
No, you're not.
You want to say that to the camera? Hundreds and hundreds of people watching you?
Me right now?
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. You just called me a man. Don't be a coward.
Don't be a coward.
See, that's where you mess up. I do think that it's wrong for those people to just randomly just come up to a person and start harassing them. But in the same token, you don't need to be feeding into it. Don't be a coward. Come back. Say it to my face. Why are you instigating it? Now I feel less bad for you because they're leaving, but you're calling it back. You're wanting that attention. You're wanting to argue. You're escalating the situation. And that's something you should never do.
The real question is, it doesn't matter if you're transgender or not. Are you with the people that march and be like, we're coming for your kids? That's where it's bad.
See, random kid on the street even recognizes that. I've talked about this on this channel so much, but the gay people were fine. The gays, the trans, the lesbians, literally no one had an issue with anything regarding LGBTQ until the kids got in the picture. We got in Blue's Clues, there's kids at Pride twerking, there's kids at Pride in front of all the nudity of the gay men, there's drag queens in schools, drag queens reading to children. If we just left the kids alone, we would be fine.
And is y'all thing a cult? It's like LGBTQL.
The LGHTV community, Skittle Squad, Rainbow Mafia, you name it, it's definitely giving cultish vibes. Because the second you have your own opinion, you get kicked out. You suffer from internalized homophobia, you're homophobic, you're transphobic, all the phobics. All of a sudden, if you have your own mind and your own thought process, you're kicked out the group. So it's definitely giving cultish vibes.
Okay, so he did a good job in that video of compiling clips together. He's basically, like, on numerous occasions pushed back against the ideology surrounding the obsession with gender identity and presents multiple examples along with commentary in the video. Anyway, my point is stuff like calling a woman a TERF and then saying the only good TERF is a dead TERF, or insisting that refusing to use preferred pronouns should count as a hate crime. I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's insanity. I see a massive difference between promoting acceptance and forcing ideology, like presenting contested gender theories as if they were settled fact, or requiring children to adopt certain words or beliefs. In schools, there are now documented cases of this. In Oakland, for example, a former teacher filed a lawsuit claiming they were punished for refusing to use a student's preferred pronouns, raising questions about whether schools are compelling speech rather than encouraging respect. At the policy level, states like Arkansas have debated or passed laws around pronoun mandates and gender identity instruction, sparking fights over whether that kind of enforcement crosses the line into ideological control. Outside of schools, controversies like Drag Queen Story Hour have fueled the same debate. Supporters call it inclusion, but critics argue it normalizes adult themes for children under the banner of diversity. Personally, I wouldn't have cared much about it if it weren't for how often these events have crossed a line. From the videos I've seen, some people have used those spaces to twerk, dress inappropriately, or present ideological messages to children. That makes it hard to trust what these events are really about anymore. Anyway, moving on. To me, those are not the same thing. Acceptance is one thing, forced ideology is another, and when you push it to children, it crosses a moral line. This isn't fringe, it's happening in real policies and lawsuits right now. This whole situation, watching the movement be perverted like this, honestly insults the values I personally hold about the community. I always wanted people to be accepted, to be treated with dignity, and to have the freedom to live how they choose. That was my moral compass, but what it became instead was a forced ideology that betrayed both the original message of the movement and my own morality. Respect and dignity for all people was supposed to be the goal, and instead it got totally upended. The pattern of demonization played out especially well with transgender issues. It happened a lot more with transgender issues than it did with other people in the LGBTQ+ community. People on the right would say there's an agenda, that instead of just supporting kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria, or who might be tomboys and would either grow up to be trans or simply grow out of it, we're pushing children towards transition too quickly. The people that would raise these concerns would also point out statistics about regret or detransition. We're being pressed dishonestly. For example, we're constantly told that only 1% of trans people regret transitioning, but I did a deep dive and I found things that didn't add up. For example, this Reddit community, RDTrans, had over 51,000 subscribers at one point. I think I remember it being 57,000 last time I checked it, but you can no longer check stats like that. Anyway, it was 51,000 according to subreddit stats, a site that tracked Reddit's data before subscriber counts were hidden. The rules are strict. Posters must identify as a detransitioner or as questioning transition, which means the majority of active posters are most likely detransitioners, and at least half are Americans, because I think half of Reddit users are Americans. Taking that into account, the Williams Institute at UCLA estimated in 2022 that about 1.6 million people in the US identify as transgender. Now, if you take that 51,000 number and compare that already, that suggests that at least 1 to 2% of trans people in the US have detransitioned and found their way to that subreddit, but it's highly unrealistic to think every detransitioner in the US would even know about the subreddit and that it exists, much less join it. That means the true number of detransitioners is probably much higher than what the official 1% regret statistic claims it to be. And here's the problem. When people on the right point this out, they're instantly labeled transphobic. Nobody debates the numbers. Instead, critics just pull up past mistreatment of trans people or grab one example of real transphobia from the conservative world and then say, see, they're all transphobic. And that's the whole conversation. It's over. I'm not a reporter, and I don't know why official statistics don't line up with what I found here, but presenting regret as basically non-existent feels dishonest, and if someone raises that concern, they're shut down with a label, and the conversation never even gets started. Now, this is just one video about why I left the left. It's not the only reason. It's one piece of a much bigger story. I didn't walk away because I suddenly became conservative or started hating everyone. I walked away because I couldn't keep pretending that forcing ideology, silencing questions, and punishing disagreement were acts of compassion. I once supported trans women in women's sports because a bunch of scientists convinced the public that it was fair. The news media tried to convince the public that it was fair. But all of that turned out to be inconsistent with reality, and now I'm afraid to even share my opinions because I know I'll be called a TERF. That's not how truth works. And it's not how unity is built. I still believe in kindness, equality, and treating people with respect, but that's not what this new version of progressivism represents. It's not about empathy anymore. It's about control. And the more I saw that, the more I realized I didn't belong there anymore. So yeah, this is just one story, one reason out of many. If you felt the same kind of confusion and exhaustion, you're not alone. There are a lot of us out here. The ones who just wanted to be honest, to be fair, and to think freely, and somehow ended up politically homeless. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. This video wound up being a lot longer than I intended.